Hey, this is really funny, just because it once again sort of pierces the false notion that all these right wingers and Trumpists want is to have transparency and conversation and dialogue and exploring our differences in a respectful way. Donald Trump Jr. was booed off stage when it was announced that he would not be taking questions during a book tour event. And there's kind of almost like a recursive nature to the way in which speech was curtailed. It's very interesting. Now, the other element to this is that the audience that did the booing is a, generally speaking, pro-Trump audience. It was an audience at an event organized by Turning Point USA. This is the pro-Trump group that spreads pro-Trump propaganda on college campuses. They have a couple of people, Charlie Corks and Candace Blowens, or Owens, I forget. And they're well known in the circuit. They love Trump. Trump loves them. It's a whole scene, right? So Don Jr. shows up at UCLA for this book tour event to promote his book. I guess technically it does count as a book, even though the writing can only be considered writing in the most technical sense. The audience is told there will be no Q&A, and they go crazy, chanting Q&A and stuff like that, and ultimately shutting down the event and Don Jr. having to walk off the stage. Now, one more thing before we look at the video and listen to the audio. You will hear a woman's voice pop up. That is Don Jr.'s new girlfriend. As many of you may know, Don Jr. is now dating Kimberly Guilfoyle, who is a former Fox News host. She's been traveling with Don to his events and being part of them, even though it's only actually a bigger distraction. If you saw the appearance of Don Jr. on The View, continually getting into arguments with people while adding nothing. And then in would pop up Kimberly Guilfoyle talking over people in trying to haphazardly defend Don Jr. It all just doesn't make any sense. She's just traveling around. He's traveling around with a former Fox News host who runs interference for him. Like, it's all just extraordinarily weird. Anyway, she's on stage as well. Let's check out the first video.
See what I mean? And that is the problem. And the reason oftentimes it doesn't make sense to do the Q&A is not because we're not willing to talk about the questions, because we do. No. It's because people hijack it with nonsense looking to go for some sort of soundbite. You have people spreading nonsense, spreading hate to try to take over that room. That's the real issue in the room.
Because you're not making your parents proud by being rude and disruptive and discourteous. We are happy to answer a question. Respect the people around you so that they can hear. You don't play by the same rules. Let me tell you something. I bet you engage and go on online dating because you're impressing no one here to get a date in person. How many people have you catfished?
So they are not pleased, clearly, with the lack of a Q&A. How patronizing is it for Kimberly Guilfoyle to tell the students that their parents wouldn't like their behavior right now? It is so funny in so many ways. And on the one hand, it's pathetic that he's not going to do a Q&A, right? The whole thing with these TPUSA events is people get to ask questions, and sometimes the questions are adversarial, but sometimes the questions are brown-nosing, but whatever, you're doing questions, and they're not going to do it. So that's pathetic. On the other hand, it's pathetic that anyone thinks Don Jr. has anything interesting to say, that they would be all broken up, that there isn't going to be a Q&A. I mean, it's the blind leading the blind in the strictest sense. And then the video continues, and Don says, listen, we're okay with Q&A in principle, but not when it's bad faith or when people derail it or whatever. And then you'll see them, if you're watching, cut to another shot where the entire thing just wraps early to resounding boos and they just walk off stage.
Hey, see, guys? The furthest leftist on a college campus, right? It doesn't happen that way. We're willing to listen. We're willing to listen.
So TPUSA is doing damage control because when you hear the protests, these are not left-wing protesters, right? These are right-wing nationalist America firsters, pro-Trumpers who want their Q&A. So TPUSA is framing it as these are extremists. This is just a wing of the right. It is not representative of a mainstream Trump supporter. Whatever, guys. I mean, have fun fighting about which contingent of your movement was behind this. But the big takeaway is that as soon as they're not in an absolute safe space, they're immediately terrified and triggered. There was no big political message here behind this protest of these supposed extremists in the audience. This was some people who were mad that they weren't going to get a chance to ask Don Jr. questions. There's no big political or philosophical message in the dumb protest, but notice how when Trump Sr., Donald Trump, the president, shows up at a sporting event and people boo, he looks visibly shocked and he's grimacing. When Don Jr. shows up and people boo, they just shut down the event after having his girlfriend lecture the crowd about how their parents would be really displeased with the way that they're behaving themselves. Their protest doesn't even make sense, but it's delightful to see their own side shut down their speech when all they do is say that it's the left that shuts down speech. Don Jr. has made a speaking career and a book, actually, a lot of the book is about this, going around saying the left shuts down dialogue, the left doesn't want their ideas challenged, the left doesn't want discussion, the left doesn't want to have to answer to criticisms of their ideas. Their followers go around saying the same thing. And what happens is that Don Jr. says no questions and the crowd shuts them down. It's ironic in a sense, not that they have any ability to see irony, but what it really proves actually is the bad faith nature with which all of these political memes become perpetuated, and they're actually meaningless. And we're going to talk about this on the Friday show. There's a question on the Friday show about SJWs, what happened to SJWs. The question is, nothing ever happened to SJWs. There were just, they became a popular target of the right. And they, to the extent that they reflect a particular wing of the left, they have existed for a long time and continue to exist, but the right has moved on to other things at this point. In the same way, it's this irony of they've been talking for so long about the left wants to shut down debate and they don't want dialogue and whatever. And of course, anecdotally, you can find instances of everything when it is the right that is so heavily triggered by disagreements, by having to defend their ideas, by someone who says, I'm not going to take questions and then shutting them down completely. These people are pathetic and they will never see the irony because they, like the president, seem to lack some, I don't know, some switch in their brain that allows them to see irony and double standards.